pleasure to be with you for this final lesson in our series of studies on duties are based on relationships. We made it known in our first lesson that the purpose of this study was to help us not only in interpreting God's Word, but in applying God's Word. And tonight we're going to be dealing in the course of our lesson tonight with some areas that are sometimes difficult for people to figure out exactly what their duties are. I'm persuaded that an understanding and proper application of this principle that we've been talking about not only can help, but it will give you the confidence to know that it's based on a scriptural foundation. So I encourage your careful and discerning attention to the things that we speak tonight. I've said from time to time that if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Lord willing, I'll be leaving and going home tonight. David has my email address. If you have a question about anything I've preached, feel free to write me. And hope that I'll read the email and answer it. Certainly free to write. We welcome that. That's how I learn, by people questioning, seeking to know God's will. Exodus chapter 20 and verse 12, in the Ten Commandments given on Mount Sinai to the nation of Israel, says, honor your father and mother. But you're not an Israelite in the nation of Israel. Does it apply to you? In Ephesians chapter 6, in a letter to Christians, that same law is quoted and applied, indicating it's the duty of Christians to honor their father and mother. And what that serves to underscore is that while that command was given to Israel, it was not unique to Israel. That duty, that obligation, that responsibility rested not on being an Israelite, but on the relationship one sustains to a father and mother. And so it transcends dispensations. It's been true from the beginning, and then throughout the Mosaical dispensation, and also in the Christian dispensation. In fact, in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8, we see that if a person does not care for his own family, and honoring includes provision. We'll see that a little bit later in our lesson. If one does not honor his own family by providing for them, he is worse than an infidel. Infidels are going to hell. How can you be worse than that? Because even infidels recognize a responsibility to their family, to their mother, their father, their grandmother, their grandfather. And if we're living under the blazing light of the religion of Christ, do not fulfill that, shame on us. It's not a Christian duty. It is the duty of Christians. But it's the duty of Christians based on the relationship. If you have no widowed mother or grandmother in need, you don't have the duty, even though you are a Christian. Now, what about this term father and mother? Honor your father and mother. How would you define that? Is it someone who is biologically related to you? Someone that is your father or your mother by blood? Or do these terms have a more expansive meaning? Over in Malachi chapter 1 and verse 6, through the prophet, God said to the nation of Israel, if I am a father, where is my honor? Clearly, this was not a biological relationship, a blood relationship with the nation. Rather, he was their provider and their protector. We'll see that this concept of father is used throughout the Bible. In Genesis chapter 45 and verse 8, Joseph, in explaining his role when his father and brothers arrived, said, I became a father to Pharaoh. Clearly not biological. They're of different races. Joseph is younger than the Pharaoh, we would presume. But be that as it may, not talking about biological father. What he means is, I provided for Pharaoh. I was put in a position to provide for this nation in a time of need. In Job chapter 29 and in verse 16, Job uses the term father in a very similar way. Job chapter 29 and verse 16. Here's what he says. I was a father to the needy and investigated the case which I did not know. A father to the needy. That is, if they needed, I investigated. If they needed help, I was there to provide what they needed. And thus, father is used in the Scriptures beyond the realm of biological relationship. Over in Psalm chapter 68, Psalm chapter 68 and verse 5, a father of the fatherless. What do you mean? And a judge for the widows. The fatherless would be orphans and widows, and they would be easily oppressed. A father of the orphans and widows, yes, their protector. A father is one who protects his quote-unquote children against oppression and abuse. In Proverbs chapter 1, look at verse 8. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. So not only do we have provision and protection, but we have teaching and guidance as the role of a father and a mother. In Psalm chapter 103 and verse 13, Psalm 103, verse 13, just as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. As a father. This is a characteristic of a father, that he has tender care. He hurts when his children hurt. He wants to soothe them and help them. That's a father. Here's the reason I wanted you to look at those verses. We're talking about honoring your father and mother. Sometimes people don't know who their biological father or mother is, for various reasons. One may be they abandoned them, and someone else may come in to either adopt them or to care for them, what we might call a stepfather or a stepmother. Honor your father and mother. Who is that? The person who gave you birth? Is that it? Or what about the people who provided for you, who protected you, who gave you guidance and counsel as you were growing up, who saw the things that hurt you and extended compassion and mercy? Are they deserving? Not father and mother by blood, but certainly father and mother in the characteristics that should describe the role of a father and a mother. Now, this passage in Exodus 20 says, honor your father and mother. And I suppose if you'd ask most people, they would say, I do honor my mom and dad. But what does that mean? In everyday life, what does that mean? As you interact in the family, what duties does that call out for you? Look at these passages that we have here in Exodus chapter 21. Exodus chapter 21, honor and respect are saying the same thing, just synonymous words. You could say respect your mother and father, honor your mother and father. And here in Exodus chapter 21 and verse 15, he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. How serious is this obligation? Think about this. It's to fail is capital punishment. To strike a mother or a father. It's a lesson to mothers and fathers when that child is just a baby, very young. It's not necessarily cute to let that child learn the habits of striking mother and father. What are they going to do when they're 15 and 18? And so respect for mother and father ought to be taught from a young age. And then if you'll look at verse 17, he said, he who curses, not cusses, curses. You can curse without cussing. Cursing is to wish something bad or evil on somebody. Say mean, harsh things that are intended to wound and express your lack of love and concern for them. And if children, in their anger or disdain or whatever, issue those kind of statements, what then? Look at the text. He who curses his father or his mother shall be given time out. Is that what it says? Shall surely be put to death. All of that inheres in this honor father and mother. In Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 32. Chapter 19 and verse 32. You shall rise up before the gray-headed and honor. Rising up was a sign of respect. That's mom and dad's chair, or they've entered the room and I want to show respect. We don't do that today, but it's not a bad custom. But the point is respect for those of age, the gray-headed. In Proverbs chapter 30, Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 17, here again are some practical applications of this obligation to honor. Verse 17, the eye that mocks a father and scorns a mother. So, mother and dad tells the children something they don't like, whatever age they are. When mom and dad turns their back and the kids go in another room, they make fun of them, mock them, scorn them. Do you honor your mother and father? Oh, yes, yes. No, you don't. No, you don't. You treat them with respect, and that prohibits this kind of action that he's talking about here in this text. In 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 1 and 2, Timothy was instructed relative to older men not to rebuke them sharply, but as a father. The idea is your father may be wrong, and he may need to be called out for his wrong. But you don't reprove your father the same way you reprove somebody your own age. You don't treat them harshly, but they're wrong. But if you don't respect their age, you're wrong. Do not sharply rebuke an older man. So these are some of the practical applications of honoring your father and mother. And so when my mother and father act wrongly, should I still honor them? Yes. Over in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 9 and 10, the writer says, they disciplined us as seemed best to them. They did the best they could. God disciplines us for our good. There's the difference. God always does it for good. The parents mean well, but sometimes their judgment may not be what they had hoped it would be. They may come back and apologize. And because parents make mistakes, it does not alleviate the responsibility. So I'll honor my mother and father as long as they're right. No. It's not based on being right. It's based on the relationship you sustain. They're your mother and father. In Genesis chapter 9, there's the story of Noah. Noah was a good and great man, but he did a shameful thing. He got drunk. He was uncovered in the tent. One of his boys, instead of honoring him, took advantage of that situation. The other two brothers did not. And so the boy that dishonored his father, his seed was cursed by God. Was Noah right for getting drunk and uncovering himself? No. He said, I'll honor my mother and father, but when they do something shameful, I don't have to honor them. Who told you that? It's not based on them being perfect. It's based on a relationship. They're still your mother and your father. And the same thing when you get to 1 Timothy chapter 5, of course, the implication is that they may do wrong and they may need to be reproved. People may say, I sure honor my mother and dad. They got such good character. They live a good and holy life. I respect them so much. And if that's the case, that's great. But what if they don't live such a great life? Does that exempt us from the responsibility of honoring them? No, because it's based on the relationship, not their quality of life. Some people will honor their mother and father because in our family, this is what we always did. Papa and grandpapa, and we've always had regard for mom and dad. That's not the reason. It's not family tradition. You say, well, it just feels right. That's not the reason. What's the reason? Duties are based on relationships. That's it. Another practical application of this honor, besides respectful speech, respectful treatment, and prohibiting disrespectful speech and conduct, is obedience. How do I know that? Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. So the word honor in and of itself doesn't mean obey. A man's to honor his wife. That doesn't necessarily mean he's to obey his wife. But in this case, honor your father and mother includes obey your father and mother in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. You say, I do. But sometimes, we're just crossways. I have a hard time. You don't honor them and obey them because you agree with them. You don't honor them and obey them because, man, if I don't, they're going to beat me to an inch of my life. Fear is a good motivation, all right. But if you're thinking straight, you honor them because of the relationship you sustain, whether they're going to discipline you like they should or not. That's not the basis of it. And so there's various reasons people might practice this matter will be, but they're not based on the Scriptures. I just say, I honor my mother and dad because I love them so much. They're my favorites, my favorite people. Well, that's good. Or I'll tell you why I'm doing it. When they kick the bucket, I'm going to get the inheritance. No, they might not have a dime. It's the relationship that undergirds the responsibility. I hope you can see how important this theme that we've been talking about all week is, and understanding our duties and obligations before God. Now, at this point in our study, I'm going to try to demonstrate something that we touched on in a previous lesson. In fact, we touched on it in our Sunday night lesson. By the very nature of the fact that this whole meeting is on duties based on relationship, there's obviously some overlap. So if you were here Sunday night, some of this will be a little bit of a refresher. If you weren't here, take note. Now look at Esther chapter 2. Esther chapter 2, verse 20. The king is looking for a new bride. And Mordecai, Esther's cousin, is trying to encourage Esther relative to that position. And in chapter 2, verse 20, there's a statement. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her. Now, Esther's a grown woman. She's getting ready and potentially the wife of the king. I don't know her age. She's a grown woman. And it says, Mordecai commanded her, don't make known your race. For Esther did what Mordecai told her. Now note this last phrase. As she had done when under his care. As when. When under his care, she was obedient to his orders. Now she's a grown woman, and he's making an order. But she is not obligated to obey that order. But she had a lot of respect for her cousin who had taken her into his care, providing, protecting, guiding, the very things we talked about earlier. Now look at Esther chapter 4. Esther chapter 4 and verse 8. There was a man who made a plot against the Jews, wanted to destroy them. Mordecai was encouraging Esther to intercede for the Jewish nation. And in chapter 4, verse 8, it says, he also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that is, the Jews' destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her and to order her to go in to the king to implore his favor and read with him for her people. So Mordecai ordering her. She's a grown woman. Did he have a right to order? She didn't have to obey his order. Relationships change. However, verse 14 indicates why she felt compelled to do so. Not because of Mordecai's order. Listen. He said, if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. He's appealing to providence. Who knows? But what you're the person God put in the proper place at the proper time to save the Jewish nation from annihilation by this wicked man Haman. And so she put her life on the line in chapter 5 and going to the king in view of that request. You can see the difference when she was a little girl and now she's a grown woman as to how she might treat Mordecai's orders. Look again at Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24. And I think we discussed this in our lesson on Sunday evening when we were talking about withdrawing. But look at Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 24. He who withholds his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. There's a father's responsibility to his son when he's 6, when he's 10, when he's 16. But what about when he's 36 or 46? Oh, wait a minute. The relationship has changed a bit. And he's not obligated to take his 36-year-old son or 46-year-old son and give him a spanking. Look again at Proverbs chapter 23, verse 14 and 15. He said, let me back up in 13. Do not hold back discipline from the child. Although you strike him with the rod, he will not die. What would happen if a 60-year-old father went to his 40-year-old son and said, come here, boy, I'm going to give you a caning. You strike him with the rod and rescue his soul from Sheol. Can you see that as the child gets older, he enters another era of his life and it changes the relationship a bit? He's still the son of the father. He still has an obligation to honor, that is, respect and not speak evil of. He still has a responsibility to provide, as we'll see in just a moment. But there is some change that takes place as he gets older. In Deuteronomy 21, I'll not read it tonight. We read it the other day. If a man has a boy who's stubborn and rebellious and he won't listen, he's to take his son to the elder of the city, explain the situation, and he's going to be stoned to death with stones. That might be true of a 16 or 18, maybe a 20-year-old. But what about a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old? We don't stop to think about this, but we understand it, don't we? That while there's still the father-son relationship, there's been some change in that relationship. There's another thing that affects this relationship. As this young boy or girl gets older, they enter new relationships that may supersede the father-child relationship. For example, in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 22 following, wives, be subject to your husbands. Verse 25, husbands, love your wives. So here's dad tells the wife something, husband tells the wife something. When she was 10, who does she listen to? When she's married, this new relationship, who does she listen to? She's entered a new relationship, and that has to be brought into play as to what her duty is. Same thing with the husband in loving his wife. All right, in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, same thing is true, that the father is to discipline his child. But that child, that boy that he may discipline when he's 14, is now 24 or 34. Now the son is a father to another person, a new relationship. Now, who has the right to discipline this boy? The granddaddy or the daddy? Which takes precedent? And so you can see that there's a new relationship that enters the picture, and with it comes duties and obligations. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 14. Paul encourages Timothy to teach young women to manage or rule. The New American Standard Version, I don't like its translation, says keep house. It's kind of like she's supposed to sweep and mop and be sure that the dishes are done. She rules the household. That's the American Standard Version. Several versions say manage the house, the household. And so while that woman as a daughter was to obey her mama and daddy. Now she has entered a new relationship with some of her own children. And that impacts the duties of that previous, still intact relationship, but it impacts the duties of that particular relationship. In Ephesians chapter 6, writing to the Ephesian church, you had people there like you do here who worked for other people. Now, back when this boy was 14, and Dad said, "Son, I want you to go mow the grass today." He had the duty to obey his father. Now he's 24. It's Tuesday. He works for somebody. He's in a relationship similar to the one described here of servants and masters. And he said, "Servants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh." So it's Tuesday, and Dad calls up, "I want you to mow the grass today." His employer says, "You can't get off today. You got to be at work today." Who did he listen to? He's entered a new relationship. And this new relationship carries responsibilities that actually supersede the previous relationship. Now, this matter of honoring father and mother, I've touched upon the fact that it involves respect in the way you speak, treat them, etc. It involves obedience. Another thing that it involves is provision for their needs. Look at Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7. Jesus made this very clear to these religious hypocrites. Mark chapter 7 and verse 9. He said, "You're experts at setting aside the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and mother.'" That's the phrase we've been looking at tonight. "But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, 'Whatever I have that would help you is carbon.'" That is, I'm giving it to the Lord. Isn't that great? He loves the Lord so much, he's not going to help his mom and dad. He's going to give it to the Lord. I don't know that they actually did. But be that as it may, you no longer permit him to do anything for his father and mother. "Hey, that money you was going to give to your mom and dad, you put it over here in the treasury. That helps support us priests." And what did he say about that? "You've invalidated the word of God by your tradition which you've handed down." In other words, God's word, honor your father and mother, means you ought to help them if that's the case. You ought to help provide for them. In our society, it's a bit different in that most mothers and fathers now either have a pension or, in addition to that, Social Security and other government programs to help sustain them that they didn't have then. Some do not. But the point is, honor your father and mother not only involves speaking to them respectfully and treating them respectfully and obeying them when you're young at home, but also providing for them when they're elderly and they need it. And we've already read 1 Timothy 5:8. If you don't provide for your own, you're worse than an infidel. Now, with that foundation, let's talk about some applications. Let's say that you're 40 years old or 50 years old. You've got a mother or a father, and they want you to hang out with them. Just go spend time with them. And maybe for one reason or another you can't. Either your job, or because they're immoral and ungodly and you don't want that, and you sure don't want your family hearing the way they talk and seeing the way they act. So you just don't go out with them and watch movies together and go to the park together and that kind of thing. Now, are you obligated to do that because they're your parents? Honor your father and mother. And what these ungodly people will sometimes do is throw that in your face. You're a Christian. Why don't you honor your mom and dad? But see, relationships have changed. You don't have the duty to hang out with them. You have the duty to provide for them. You have the duty to be respectful to them. But just to hang out and spend time with them, no. If they're in need, yes, you have a responsibility. And that need may be emotional. They may need somebody just to talk to encourage them. Do you have to indulge their every whim? They call you up. Hey, I need something. Drop everything you've got. Forget your family. Take off and take it. No, you're not obligated to do that. But doesn't say honor your father and mother? Yes. But you've got a wife. You've got children. And you've got a job. There are other relationships. And that father-child relationship has been impacted by these other relationships. And you don't have to feel guilty for not indulging their every whim. You don't have to act like they're perfect. It may be times you have to rebuke your mother or your father. They may say, what are you doing? Don't you know the Bible says honor father and mother? Honor father and mother doesn't mean that you never rebuke them. You do it respectfully. Sometimes older parents will abuse people, even steal, and do other things that are ungodly. Because honor your father and mother, does that mean you got to cover it up? Just kind of put a blanket over it? Don't let anybody know? No, it doesn't mean that. But that may be, you may be accused of not honoring them if you don't cover for their misdeeds. Honor your father and mother doesn't include that. What about trying to change them? You know, I'm going to try to change them. Jesus said a prophet is not without honor, saving his own country. It'd be great if you could change them, but you're probably the least likely to do so. When the apostles went out, Jesus said, don't throw your pearls before swine. And if that mother or father's not interested in truth, they're interested in their own ungodly life, you're not obligated to change them. That's not a lack of honoring mother and father, and there's no reason to feel guilt when you just say, well, they don't have hearts interested in truth. I can't do anything. They may say, do you love me? Do you ever hug me and show emotion? The love that you're to have is not an emotional love. It's a caring love. There's at least 3 different kinds of love in the Bible. There's a physical love between a husband and wife. There's an emotional love between a husband and wife. But then there's a caring love. You do things for people because you esteem them worthy. Worthy because of their life? No, they're made in the image of God. They're your neighbor. That's why. Or a fellow Christian, for example. And so, the way your mother or father treats you may kill your emotions because they've been so abusive and ungodly, have no respect for you and your children and your family. Don't confuse honoring your father and mother with the idea that you've got emotional feelings for them. I'm your mother and daddy. You need to forgive me. Is that true? Not necessarily. And contrary to what you see on TV, God doesn't expect people to forgive unconditionally. Jesus said, if he repents, forgive him. God told Jeremiah, don't pray for those people. If a person's impenitent, you are not obligated to forgive them. We just sang about being like Jesus. You want to be like Jesus? That's what he taught. Don't let people who do not know the Scriptures or respect the Bible fill you with the burden of guilt for not honoring your mother and father on unjust and unfair grounds. I don't know what kind of family you were brought up in. We use a term sometime today, dysfunctional families. There was fighting and abuse and disrespect, and maybe the family fact busted up. And people sometimes use that as an excuse for their behavior. Maybe their family supposedly went to church and they were Christian, but you lived there and you saw the way they acted. And that can be used as an excuse for ungodly living. Look at 2 Chronicles chapter 34. We've got a lot of young people here tonight. These would be some good verses to write down. I know y'all are taking notes. That's been so encouraging, these young people taking notes. Be good verses to read. Talk with your parents about. Here's a man named Josiah. What was his father like? Well, look at verse 21. Ammon, that's his father, was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned 2 years in Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord as Manasseh his father had done. And Ammon sacrificed all the carved image which his father Manasseh had made and served them. Moreover, he did not humble himself before the Lord. His daddy was a wicked idolater. Wicked man. I wonder what it was like to live in his father's house. You reckon there were idols all over the place? You reckon there's mockery of the religion to the one true God? But look, what about his grandfather? Go back up to the first verse. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the abominations of the nations, whom the Lord dispossessed before the sons of Israel. You read about Manasseh, one of the most wicked kings in their history. That's Josiah's grandfather. I can't imagine. Well, you want to go visit Grandpa? But let's read about Josiah, verse 1 of chapter 34. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. He did right in the sight of the Lord and walked in the ways of his father, not Father Ammon, his ancestor, his spiritual father, Father David. He was in the lineage, but he's following in the steps of David's faith. He walked in the ways of his father David and did not turn aside to the right or to the left. He became king when he was 8. Listen, verse 3. For in the 8th year of his reign, how old would he be? How old are you, young people? This audience, we've got young people going to college. He was 16. 16. You know what kind of family life he endured. In the 8th year of his reign, while he was still a youth, he began to seek the God of his father David. And in the 12th year, how old is he now? He's 20. Got some 20-year-olds out here. Are you thinking about serving God? You say, well, you don't know my family. Make any difference about your family. 20 years old. It says, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the Asherah, the carved image, and the molten images. They tore down the altars of the Baals in his presence, and the incense altars, etc. What a time that was. I cannot imagine how mad people were at him. I just wonder if his life was threatened. He's going around tearing down people's place of worship, tearing down their idols. He loved the Lord so much. What I see in the story of Josiah, every person has the responsibility and the ability. You have presence of mind to make the choice to serve God. Don't use your family, your background as an excuse. Josiah, I'd sure like to know who taught Josiah. I'd like to know who influenced him. I don't know. But what a privilege you have tonight. this week. It's been such a pleasure for me to be here, to see parents and grandparents and young people together, for you to live at a time and place where you have that kind of influence in your life. And I'll tell you what, folks, if Josiah could overcome the conditions he had, there's absolutely no excuse for the young people in this audience to ever abandon the faith that's been instilled in your hearts. We started our lesson with Matthew 22. What's the greatest commandment? The greatest. Fear God and keep His commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, Jesus said. This is the first and foremost commandment. There's nothing in your life more important than that. Not school, not college, not your grades, not your sports, nothing. This is it. You have that duty. Not because of your family, not because you're a part of a church here, not because you live in America. You have that duty because you are related to that Almighty God, your Creator, and will give account to Him when your days are done. So 1 Corinthians 10:31 kind of sums it up. This man wrote this, and that's the way he lived. He encouraged the Corinthians, whatever you do in word or deed, do all to the glory of God. Would to God that would be the ultimate criteria of every decision that we make. Will it glorify my God? We're going to sing the song that's been selected. After the song or the prayer, whichever one, I would like to have some more comments to make. But we're going to sing this song that's been selected. We've not spoken of at the end of our lessons about obeying the gospel of Jesus Christ. But I want to do that tonight. If there's someone in this audience who is cognizant of their guilt and their sin, and if they were to die, would not be ready to meet their Maker, the one answer is Jesus Christ. And if you know who He is and believe who He is and what He's done, and you're willing to put your will aside and adopt Him as the King of your life and confess His name and be buried in the waters of baptism, you can do that tonight. If you were doing that and you wandered away, you can come back. That opportunity will be yours as together we stand and as we sing.